She was only on her way to work, until a reckless dash through roaring traffic nearly cost her life, all to save a trembling little puppy stranded in the middle of the street. What she didn't know was that the dog belonged to a young millionaire, hollowed out by grief after losing his fiancée, drifting like a ghost through the city, a single act of kindness. Could it mend two shattered lives, each splintered by loss? Because sometimes people don't meet to fall in love right away, but to relearn how to believe in gentleness. This story does not begin with love. It begins with a dog and someone brave enough to stop. Sophie's tiny apartment clung to the third floor of an aging building on the outskirts of Nashville, where the late afternoon light filtered through warped window panes, casting soft, wistful streaks across the walls, like a forgotten melody. Humming just out of reach, everything in the room was modest. Her small writing desk nestled by the window, a low bookshelf barely holding a handful of battered novels, and a mini-fridge that groaned and hiccuped whenever its motor stirred to life. Yet for Sophie, this was sanctuary, the only place in the world where silence belonged entirely to her. She sat quietly on the worn wooden floor, back pressed against the wall, legs drawn close, cradling an old picture frame she had carried with her since girlhood. In the faded photograph, 7-year-old Sophie beamed, hugging a stuffed dog nearly her size, a gift from a charity visit to the orphanage that year. The toy's ear was torn, its belly frayed, yet it had been the first and only thing Sophie ever called her own. She turned the frame over, running her fingers over the nearly erased pencil scrawl on the back, waiting for someone to find me. Just once. Sophie read the words again and again, like a ritual she performed whenever loneliness pressed too close. Years had passed, and that someone had never come. At least, not on the surface. Still, deep within her eyes, something fragile refused to die. On the small table sat a cup of ginger tea, gone cold beside a notebook where Sophie scribbled everything, from recipes to quiet wishes no one else would ever hear. She flipped to the latest page, last night's uneven handwriting. Waiting there tomorrow, biking to work again. The cold's sharper this time. Each night she left herself a note about the day ahead, not to plan exactly, but to remind herself tomorrow still existed, whether or not it held anything worth wanting. Her frayed canvas backpack rested by the chair, one strap patched hastily with thread of a mismatched color. Gently, Sophie slipped the picture frame inside, tucking it between two folded sweaters. No particular reason. Carrying it simply made her feel tethered to something that endured. Outside, the sky darkened to a deep indigo. From the crooked window, the distant wail of traffic echoed, steady and indifferent, as if to remind her the world spun on without pause. Sophie stood, pulling on her jacket, fingers sliding into fingerless wool gloves worn thin by seasons past. She straddled her old bicycle, adjusting the basket up front, then paused as a sudden gust whipped through, snapping her coat open and stinging her cheeks with bitter cold. And yet, something in her stilled. She lifted her gaze skyward, not searching for anything in particular, but sensing a subtle shift in the air, a faint stirring of instinct she'd never learned to name. With a soft sigh, she nodded, as though answering an unspoken question. "Let's go." She began to pedal, legs steady, wheels turning familiar grooves into the damp pavement, heading for the avenue she passed every morning. But tonight, something felt altered. The fog hung heavier than usual, draping the street, in a veil that both hid and revealed, as if the night itself hesitated, holding its breath for what might come next. Cold wind lashed her face, but Sophie did not slow. In her mind, the image of the little girl in the photo stayed with her, his eyes wide with hope, clutching the stuffed dog as if clinging to the very idea of trust. If tomorrow someone needs saving. The sentence drifted unfinished, yet her heart already knew the rest. Just as Sophie rounded onto the familiar boulevard, her wheels jerked to a sudden stop. Through the heavy mist and weaving cars, there, it was Bob, a fragile, solitary figure stranded in the chaos. The fog hung thick like a silken veil draped across the suburban avenue outside Nashville. Rain from the night before still clung to the pavement, and headlights from early commuters carved shimmering trails through the mist, like memories, rushing backward in time. Sophie rode quietly along the shoulder, her bike tires whispering over fallen maple leaves that scattered and spun beneath her wheels. The worn backpack pressed into her spine every time she sped up, and though her fingers numbed from the cold, she pedaled on, propelled more by habit than intent. Then, suddenly, she stopped short. Frozen between two roaring lanes of traffic, stood a small pale gold puppy, motionless as if turned to stone. It didn't bark. It didn't run. It simply trembled, soaked to the bone, its wide eyes radiating sheer terror. Sophie scanned the road. There was no one else. Just her, and the relentless tide of headlights bearing down. There wasn't time to think. She threw her bike toward the curb and sprinted, her shoes skidding on the slick asphalt. Without hesitation, she launched herself into the road. Like an arrow loosed in silence, car horns split the air, sharp and frantic. A black SUV swerved hard and mere feet away. Sophie lunged forward, arms outstretched, scooping the fragile creature into her embrace, her body pitched sideways. The SUV's windshear whipped her hair skyward as its tires shrieked, leaving behind the acrid sting of burnt rubber. Sophie hit the edge of the street, back slamming against a signpost, her knee splitting open against the cold metal. She hardly felt it. Her heart thundered, breath ragged, arms clutching the shivering puppy tight against her chest. The dog trembled violently, ears pinned back. But it was alive. "Cooper! Oh my God!" A man's voice rang out, breathless, frantic. Sophie turned. A young man was running toward her, tall, clad in a simple grey sweater, his face hollow with exhaustion. He dropped to his knees beside her, eyes locked on the little bundle cradled in Sophie's arms. "Cooper, buddy, you scared me," he murmured, reaching out to gently pull the dog against his chest, hugging it tightly as if afraid the night might steal it away again. The puppy, Cooper, recognized him instantly. It burrowed into his sleeve, letting out a soft, apologetic whimper. The man looked up. Their eyes met, and Sophie felt something shift deep inside her. His gaze held gratitude, yes, but beneath that, something heavier. A sorrow so profound he himself seemed unaware of its weight. A weariness that didn't crease his skin, but lived deeper behind his pupils, where broken dreams quietly settled. "Are you okay?" His voice was hoarse, uncertain. Sophie nodded faintly, offering a thin, tentative smile that trembled with the effort of holding herself together. "I'm fine, just shaken up a little. Thank you, I don't even know what to say." His head bowed as he clung tighter to Cooper, his features tightening with unspoken fatigue, not from age, but from countless sleepless nights carved out by unnamed losses. For a few suspended seconds, they said nothing more. The world continued to hum around them, cars rolling by, hearts slowly remembering how to beat at a calmer pace. Sophie stood first, brushing dust from her jeans, her eyes lingering on Cooper, now peacefully curled up against his owners. "Chess, I think he's lucky you got here when you did." "No," the man said quietly. "Cooper's lucky because of you." His words stopped her. Sophie didn't respond right away. She only smiled, softer this time, untouched by strain, and then turned toward her fallen bicycle. "I should get going. Work calls. Take care of him, okay?" He nodded, eyes never leaving her as she slung on her backpack and righted her bike. He didn't offer his name, nor did she ask. As she pushed off to leave, Sophie glanced back one last time. He was still standing there, holding Cooper close, watching her fade into the mist. Something unspoken flickered behind his eyes, as though he longed to say more but couldn't, or wouldn't. Not yet. Sophie pedaled onward, but her chest felt different now, tight with something new. Her pulse still raced, though not from fear. In the quiet space between then and now, she realized what unsettled her most. His eyes, Weston's, were ones she had seen before. In the mirror. Cold, tired, desperate for someone to really truly see. And as the wind bit at her cheek, Sophie whispered to herself, "I don't know who he is, but something just changed." The little bakery sat quietly on the corner, where morning sunlight slanted through wide glass panes, scattering soft, uneven patterns across the pale cream walls. Sunlight Bakery, where Sophie spent her early hours, was modest, but warm, its air steeped in the comforting scent of butter, fresh coffee, and something tender that gently embraced each soul who stepped inside. Behind the counter, Sophie moved swiftly, arranging warm muffins in the display case. She hadn't told anyone about the strange morning before, the mad dash into traffic, the man named Weston with eyes that carried a weight too heavy to name, or the trembling puppy, Cooper, who had nestled against her chest like a mirror of her own childhood heart. She kept it all to herself, as she always did. The bell above the door jingled softly. Sophie didn't look up right away, preoccupied with wiping her hands and preparing a regular's coffee. "Welcome to Sunlight Bakery," she called out with habitual cheer. "Good morning." The voice, low, familiar, made her pause. She glanced up. Weston stood there. The same grey sweater. The same weary, hollow eyes that somehow still held a depth she couldn't forget. At his feet, Cooper sat obediently, silver collar catching the faint morning glow. Their eyes met. And again, that strange sensation, not quite a spark, but enough to make something inside tilt, quiet and unsure. Weston offered a small nod, glancing toward the pastries. "I'll have a blueberry muffin, and if you have it, ginger tea." Sophie blinked, surprised. "We mostly serve coffee." "But hold on." She ducked beneath the counter, rummaging through the back of a forgotten drawer, exactly where things rarely needed end up. Sure enough, a crumpled but still good packet of ginger tea remained. "Got lucky," she muttered under her breath. Returning to the counter, she set down the muffin and a steaming cup of tea, her hand resting lightly beside the warm paper cup. "How's the little guy doing?" she asked gently. Weston smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Still himself, sweet, curious, easily terrified. Sophie let out a soft laugh, not loud, but genuine. "That's good. Enough?" Weston nodded and reached for his wallet, but Sophie held up her hand. "On the house, a ginger tea's kind of rare here." They both laughed quietly, a small moment suspended in easy grace. No names were exchanged, no phone numbers. Nothing beyond what the morning was willing to offer. Weston scooped Cooper into his arms and gave a polite nod of farewell before stepping out. Sophie watched as his figure disappeared past the glass door, morning sunlight draping his shoulders. Like something drawn from a half-forgotten dream, she turned back to her half-finished coffee, raising it to her lips, and stopped. On the table where Weston had sat, tucked beneath the empty muffin plate, was a folded piece of paper. Sophie unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was slanted, simple, but carried an unmistakable tenderness. "Thank you for being kind when no one else noticed." Her hands trembled slightly, not from the words themselves, but from the quiet truth they held. Someone had noticed. For the first time in so long, Sophie felt seen. Not because of anything grand or heroic, but because kindness, in a world that so often turned away, still mattered. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her jacket pocket, her heart now beating just a little unevenly as she returned to her tasks. Beneath the counter, faint wet paw prints dotted the tile where Cooper had been. Sophie noticed them and smiled softly, knowing they would fade soon enough. But the imprint Weston had left behind, that, she knew, would linger. Late in the afternoon, a delicate rain threaded itself across the glass roof of Sunlight Bakery. The drops fell in steady rhythm, clinging to the windows in soft, blurred streaks, much like Sophie's mood, shapeless yet quietly surging. Beneath the surface, the shop was nearly empty. Sophie was helping the owner tidy up the bookshelf tucked in the corner, a small collection of old cookbooks, pastel-colored prints, and worn magazines. Her hands moved mechanically, wiping dust with practiced ease, until a magazine slipped from her grasp and tumbled to the floor. It fell open. Bold letters stretched across the center of the page. Weston Hart, the CEO who lost his fiancée weeks before their wedding. A city in mourning. Sophie froze. Her eyes darted over the article, fingers tightening against the fragile, faded paper. A black and white photograph dominated the page. Weston, clad in a dark suit, standing in a cemetery, Cooper still tiny in his arms. His face in the picture was hollow, stripped of emotion. Cooper gazed up at him, equally silent and heartbreakingly small against the vastness of grief. Sophie read every word. The accident had happened 2 weeks before the wedding. Sarah, Weston's fiancée, was killed instantly. He had refused to speak to the press, appearing only once at the funeral, holding the puppy meant to be a wedding gift. A weight pressed hard against Sophie's chest. She couldn't explain the flood of emotion, confusion, hurt, something sharp and raw. He hadn't lied to her. He hadn't promised anything. And yet, why hadn't he said a word? Why, when he had looked her in the eye that morning, amid ginger tea and blueberry muffins, hadn't he told her who he was? Sophie set the magazine down and turned away, her hands trembling. That night, her small apartment fell into an oppressive hush. Rain tapped gently against the window, filling the silence with its quiet insistence. Sophie sat on the floor, clutching the old photo frame against her chest. The weak glow of her desk lamp fell across the picture, little Sophie grinning, her arms wrapped tightly around a stuffed dog, eyes that had once been carefree, untouched by the ache of disappointment. Her phone lit up. Weston. A single word on the screen. "Hi." Sophie stared. She typed, "Why didn't you tell me about her? About Cooper? About everything?" Deleted it. Typed again. "I thought I met someone real. But maybe I'm just another shadow in your sad story." Deleted that too. In the end, she said nothing. She let the screen dim on its own, the weight of her unsent words sinking heavily in the room. Elsewhere across the city, Weston sat by his penthouse window. Rain now fell harder, striking the glass with blunt insistence. He held his phone, staring at the draft he had typed. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth." Deleted. Typed again. "You have every right to be angry. I just wanted for once not to be Weston Hart, just to be someone ordinary." Deleted that too. He exhaled and set the phone aside, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Cooper rested quietly at his feet, head on Weston's leg, steady and faithful. "I messed up, didn't I?" Weston murmured, voice cracking under the weight of regret. The dog said nothing, only sighed softly, eyes closed as though forgiving him without words. Morning came. Sophie awoke with swollen eyes and a heaviness that settled deep in her bones. No new messages. Her hand drifted to her chest, feeling the slow, steady beat that somehow kept going, even when everything else felt stalled. In the stillness, a single question echoed inside her. Do I have the courage to face this truth? Or will I keep running like I always have? What began with tenderness had crashed against the wall of reality, not because Weston was someone important, but because between them, trust was still too fragile, hidden beneath the armor they both wore. Ahead of them, there remained only choice, to close off once more, or to step through fear and meet whatever waited on the other side. Weston sat at the wooden table in his penthouse, his phone lying silent before him, its screen dark after countless drafts typed and erased. Sophie hadn't written back, not a single word. He knew she had read his message. The tiny scene indicator glowed like a weight pressing against his chest, heavier than any silence he had ever known. Cooper stirred, lifting his head and sneezing softly, as if nudging Weston from his spiraling thoughts. Weston exhaled, his hand brushing over the dog's head, fingers slow and unsure. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something that unnerved him. Fear, not fear of losing Sophie. He had never truly had her, but fear that his silence, once his shield to protect others from his own wreckage, had become the very thing that pushed them away. He rose quietly. As he passed his desk, his gaze fell upon an old picture. Frame, Weston and Sarah caught in a candid moment, on the day they brought home their first rescue dog. A memory he hadn't meant to stir, but one that refused to stay buried. There had been something in Sophie's eyes back at the bakery, something faint, nearly imperceptible yet achingly familiar. Not because she reminded him of Sarah, she didn't, but because in both he had seen a quiet kind of courage. The courage to be kind in a world growing colder by the day. Just then Cooper trotted up, carrying something between his teeth. Weston frowned as he recognized it, Sarah's old collar dislodged from the memory box tucked high on the shelf. He stared. A collar, a dog, a love left undone. And now, another woman, quietly closing herself off because of his silence. Weston understood then what he couldn't undo. But he also knew he didn't have to keep running. Morning came, pale and cold. Nashville's skies stretched thin and grey, draped like a mourning veil across the city. The breeze stirred brittle leaves along the winding road leading to the Southside Cemetery, where headstones stood like unfinished stories waiting to be read. Weston walked slowly, clutching a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. Cooper padded beside him, ears down, moving as though he too understood the somber weight of the place. The silver collar jingled softly with every step. Weston rarely visited, not because he had forgotten, but because each return cut deeper than the last. But today felt different. He stopped when he reached the simple stone nestled beneath the last row of maples. Sarah Lane Hartin, loving memory. Forever. Our Sunshine, 1989, 2022. Weston knelt. Placing the flowers carefully at the base, Cooper lay quietly beside him, his presence steady and grounding. For a while, Weston said nothing. He stared at the stone, hands clasped, forehead resting against his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice broke softly through the hush. "I'm sorry it's taken me this long to come back." The wind stirred the trees overhead, dry leaves whispering like echoes of distant conversations. "You know," he continued, voice thick with unshed tears, "I tried to forget you. I thought that's what healing was supposed to look like. But you're not something to forget. You're something I have to learn to live with." A single golden leaf drifted down, landing quietly at his feet. Weston drew a slow, steady breath. "I met someone." He paused, the words fragile in the still air. "She's not like you, but something about her reminded me what it felt like to believe in kindness again." He lifted his head, and for the first time in a year, his eyes didn't hold only sorrow. There was light there now, faint but alive. "You wouldn't want me to stay in the dark forever, would you?" The wind answered in gentle gusts, tugging softly at his scarf, brushing his coat as though, in silent agreement. Weston smiled faintly, warmth threading through his farewell. He stood slowly, placing his palm flat against the cold stone. "Thank you for everything. And goodbye." As he turned to leave, Cooper glanced back once, head bowed in quiet reverence, as though offering his own farewell to the soul they both carried within them. On the way home, Weston looked up. The sky had begun to break open, winter's heavy shroud giving way to fragile blue. For the first time in so long, the storm inside him had passed. What remained was quiet. Not emptiness, but a gentle stillness, the kind that comes when you finally learned how to let go, not to forget, but to live bravely with everything that remains. Driving away from the cemetery, Weston didn't rush home. He let the car roll slowly through familiar streets, roads he and Sarah had once wandered, places he had carefully avoided until now. But today, he didn't turn away. He kept going. No detours, no evasions, no hiding from memory. The window was down, cold air stinging his face, making him feel, if only for a moment, alive again. Cooper rested his head on the passenger seat, glancing at him as if to ask, "Are you okay?" Weston smiled, not out of politeness but from something far quieter. No, he wasn't entirely okay, but he was ready, not to replace Sarah, not to fill some hollow with someone new, but to finally look at someone, honestly, openly, without expectation, only hope. By late afternoon, as sunlight stretched thin across the street where the small bakery stood, Weston pulled over across from it. He drew a deep breath. He hadn't known if Sophie would still be there. He hadn't known if he had anything left to offer. But this time, he understood. If he didn't come, then every act of letting go before this would mean nothing. So, for once he stepped forward, not to escape but to reach for something worth beginning. The bakery was closed. The lights inside were out, yet a small porch lamp cast a faint glow soft as candlelight onto the empty steps. The late winter breeze carried the faint scent of ginger and damp earth from last night's rain. Sophie stood alone, Cooper cradled. In her arms, her grey knit dress swaying lightly in the wind. She had waited almost 10 minutes, uncertain if Weston would come, uncertain too of what she might say if he did. But tonight, she knew one thing. She didn't want to let something slip away, not again. A figure emerged down the street. Weston, no flowers, no gifts, just himself. Hands in the pockets of his dark wool jacket, his face stripped of pretense. He stopped 3 steps away from her. Silence folded between them. Cooper's soft breaths were the only sound, until a leaf skittered across. The porch brushing against Sophie's shoe. Weston spoke first, his voice low and rough. "I was afraid you wouldn't come." Sophie's reply was hoarse, nearly a whisper. "I was afraid I'd walk away." They both laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, but because relief made space where fear had been. Weston took a careful step closer, his hand rising slightly, not to grasp, but to offer. "After Sarah died, I existed, but I didn't really live. I kept going to the same places, repeating the same days, just to prove I was still here." His voice faltered, softening. "Then came Cooper. And then, you." He paused, swallowing against the swell in his throat. "You're not her. But when you held Cooper, I saw something real, something I hadn't let myself hope for again. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm just asking if you'll let me begin something new. With you. If you'll let me." Sophie clutched Cooper a little tighter, warmth rising. And fragile. Her eyes shimmered in the porch light. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was the one left behind. Always quiet, never asking, never stepping too close. Because that way, no one could hurt me. But being alone, that's its own kind of wound." She hesitated, then asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. "What is it you want from me?" Weston didn't rush his response. He moved closer, until only a breath separated them. "I don't want anything specific. I just want to know what you eat for breakfast, the songs you play when you're sad, how you sit in silence when words aren't easy. I want to share the small things I've always done alone." Sophie's lashes fluttered. Tears slipped down, but she smiled, without effort, without restraint. "I can't promise to be simple. I'll have silent days, I'll get jealous of memories, I'll doubt myself." Weston nodded, his voice a tender murmur. "Then let's be kind about that." Together, they stood quietly, letting the moment fill without forcing it. Cooper nestled quietly in Sophie's arms, his ears relaxed as though listening too. Sophie knelt, setting him gently on the brick step. Then she rose and stepped closer, her hand lifted, resting softly against Weston's chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and real. "If you're ready to live a life that isn't perfect," she whispered, "then I'm ready to stop running." Weston covered her hand with his own, his grip warm, certain. "I've been scared and I've lost and I've been tired for so long. But now, I'm ready to trust again. Not to fall in love right this second. Not to make forever promises. Just to begin. Together." Sophie laughed then, a real unguarded sound that filled the quiet evening air. "That sounds pretty good. Better than pretending you're fine when you're really alone." Cooper gave a soft bark as if in agreement. Above them, beyond the thinning clouds, a single star blinked shyly into view. And there they stood, 2 people who had once been broken, once afraid, daring to breathe together again. Not because Everything had healed, but because they had chosen finally to stop being afraid and to start living true. Driving away from the cemetery, Weston didn't rush home. He let the car roll slowly through familiar streets, roads he and Sarah had once wandered, places he had carefully avoided until now. But today, he didn't turn away. He kept going. No detours, no evasions, no hiding from memory. The window was down, cold air stinging his face, making him feel, if only for a moment, alive again. Cooper rested his head on the passenger seat, glancing at him as if to ask, "Are you okay?" Weston smiled, not out of politeness but from something far quieter. No, he wasn't entirely okay, but he was ready, not to replace Sarah, not to fill some hollow with someone new, but to finally look at someone, honestly, openly, without expectation, only hope. By late afternoon, as sunlight stretched thin across the street where the small bakery stood, Weston pulled over across from it. He drew a deep breath. He hadn't known if Sophie would still be there. He hadn't known if he had anything left to offer. But this time, he understood. If he didn't come, then every act of letting go before this would mean nothing. So, for once he stepped forward, not to escape but to reach for something worth beginning. The bakery was closed. The lights inside were out, yet a small porch lamp cast a faint glow soft as candlelight onto the empty steps. The late winter breeze carried the faint scent of ginger and damp earth from last night's rain. Sophie stood alone, Cooper cradled. In her arms, her grey knit dress swaying lightly in the wind. She had waited almost 10 minutes, uncertain if Weston would come, uncertain too of what she might say if he did. But tonight, she knew one thing. She didn't want to let something slip away. Not again. A figure emerged down the street. Weston, no flowers, no gifts, just himself. Hands in the pockets of his dark wool jacket, his face stripped of pretense. He stopped 3 steps away from her. Silence folded between them. Cooper's soft breaths were the only sound, until a leaf skittered across the porch, brushing against Sophie's shoe. Weston spoke first, his voice low and rough. "I was afraid you wouldn't come." Sophie's reply was hoarse, nearly a whisper. "I was afraid I'd walk away." They both laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because relief made space where fear had been. Weston took a careful step closer, his hand rising slightly, not to grasp, but to offer. "After Sarah died, I existed, but I didn't really live. I kept going to the same places, repeating the same days, just to prove I was still here." His voice faltered, softening. "Then came Cooper. And then, you." He paused, swallowing against the swell in his throat. "You're not her. But when you held Cooper, I saw something real, something I hadn't let myself hope for again. I'm not asking you to replace anyone. I'm just asking if you'll let me begin something new. With you. If you'll let me." Sophie clutched Cooper a little tighter, warmth rising. And fragile. Her eyes shimmered in the porch light. "I've spent my whole life thinking I was the one left behind. Always quiet, never asking, never stepping too close. Because that way, no one could hurt me. But being alone, that's its own kind of wound." She hesitated, then asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer, "What is it you want from me?" Weston didn't rush his response. He moved closer, until only a breath separated them. "I don't want anything specific. I just want to know you, to know what you eat for breakfast, the songs you play when you're sad, how you sit in silence when words aren't easy. I want to share the small things I've always done alone." Sophie's lashes fluttered. Tears slipped down, but she smiled, without effort, without restraint. "I can't promise to be simple. I'll have silent days, I'll get jealous of memories, I'll doubt myself." Weston nodded, his voice a tender murmur. "Then let's be kind about that." Together, they stood quietly, letting the moment fill without forcing it. Cooper nestled quietly in Sophie's arms, his ears relaxed as though listening too. Sophie knelt, setting him gently on the brick step. Then she rose and stepped closer. Her hand lifted, resting softly against Weston's chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and real. "If you're ready to live a life that isn't perfect," she whispered, "then I'm ready to stop running." Weston covered her hand with his own, his grip warm, certain, "I've been scared and I've lost and I've been tired for so long. But now, I'm ready to trust again. Not to fall in love right this second. Not to make forever promises, just to begin. Together." Sophie laughed then, a real unguarded sound that filled the quiet evening air. "That sounds pretty good. Better than pretending you're fine when you're really alone." Cooper gave a soft bark as if in agreement. Above them, beyond the thinning clouds, a single star blinked shyly into view. And there they stood, two people who had once been broken, once afraid, daring to breathe together again. Not because everything had healed, but because they had chosen finally to stop being afraid and to start living true. It didn't begin with a date. There was no "Are you free tomorrow night?" No flowers, no background music, no nervous gestures from someone trying too hard. Just a simple text on a quiet Wednesday morning. "You once said you liked honey. Toast. There's a place on 12th that makes the best right at 9 a.m." Sophie read the message and smiled. She didn't reply, but at exactly 9, Weston looked up to find her walking into the cafe, as though he'd always known she would. They sat by the window and talked about food, about Cooper, about how Weston hated driving in the mornings because the slanting sunlight stung his eyes. Mornings became something soft between them after that. Some days they met at the bakery. Sometimes Sophie brought her notebook of recipes, sitting across from Weston as he typed quietly on his laptop. They didn't fill the silence, and they simply shared it. Presence, simple and constant, became their new ritual. One afternoon, Weston invited her for a walk around the lake. Cooper bounded ahead, wild with delight. Sophie spoke about being rejected from dance classes as a child, told she wasn't feminine enough. Weston laughed, not mockingly but gently. "You don't need labels," he said. "You're already beautiful the way you exist." The words landed deeper than flattery. They felt like recognition. On another evening, Sophie read him poetry, her own for the first time aloud. Weston didn't understand every word, but he listened wholly. "When did you write that, ma'am?" he asked. "When I was 15, back when I thought no one would ever choose me." He didn't answer. He only reached across the table, his hand warm as it covered hers. Later, Weston shared his own confessions about a father who taught him control above all, who made emotions feel like mistakes to be corrected. "Would you believe," Weston said, half laughing, "that I used to practice smiling in the mirror for interviews?" Sophie laughed too, not at him, but because she understood, and so it went week after week. They never called it dating, never labeled what they were. They just showed up in each other's lives, and somehow the showing up was enough. Enough to stitch fractured pieces closer together. One evening, as sunset bled red across the sky, Weston paused mid-walk, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "I want to show you something," he said. "When?" Sophie asked. "When? It's quiet. When you're ready." She didn't press for details. She only nodded softly. A few days later, on a crisp spring evening when winter's breath still lingered, Weston parked at the edge of a nearly forgotten trail. Sophie sat beside him, moonlight washing through, the windshield turning her hair silver at the edges. "Where are we going?" she asked, curious, half laughing. "Somewhere that used to feel empty. But I think tonight it might feel beautiful." Ahead, Cooper trotted forward eagerly, nose deep in the wildflowers, as though he too knew this moment mattered. They stepped into a wide-open meadow, quiet, endless, bathed in moonlight that dusted the grasses and tiny yellow blooms like soft scattered stars. Sophie stopped, awed by the hush. "This place," she murmured, "used to be where I came when I had nowhere else," Weston said quietly, crouching to touch a small blossom. "For a year I came here when it all got too heavy. I didn't talk. I didn't think. I just stood. Alone." Sophie didn't interrupt. She stood still, letting the wind tug gently at her coat. "And now you're here," she whispered. Weston nodded slowly. "Because tonight I don't need to stand here alone." They sat together on a small hill overlooking the moonlit field. There's no music, no grand words. Just two people who had once broken, now side by side. Not because they were healed, but because they dared to be. Weston turned to her, voice steady but soft. "I used to think falling in love again would need to feel different, safer, structured, but then you happened. You didn't rush in, you didn't ask too much, and you didn't try to fix me. You were just here." And somehow that reminded me how to breathe again. Sophie looked up at the full moon overhead, eternal and silent, a witness to countless unnamed loves. "I thought being chosen would be loud," she said softly. "Like firework, like waves crashing. But it turns out the deepest things arrive quiet as a sigh. You didn't choose me because I remind you of anyone. And I didn't choose you because you lost someone. I chose you because, when you smile, I see you still believe in kindness." Weston met her gaze, and this time there was no sorrow in his eyes, only light, tender and real. "I'm not here to replace memories," he said. "I'm here to make something new. Not to run, but to walk beside someone who won't turn away when things get hard." Sophie tightened her fingers around his. "I can't promise I won't be scared, or that I won't falter, but I won't quit. Even if I move slowly, and even if I stop sometimes." That, Cooper circled them once before collapsing happily onto the grass, tongue lolling, the perfect punctuation to their quiet vow. Sophie laughed, the sound effortless. "I think Cooper's already chosen us." Weston smiled, easy and light. "He chose us long ago. We just took our time to notice." A gust swept through, bending the wildflowers before they sprang upright again, resilient. The moon burned brighter, casting their clasped hands in pale silver. No promises, no titles, no masks. Only two souls, honest and open, sitting still, together in the night. Not because everything was fixed, but because they had stopped running and at last dared to begin. 1 year later, spring had returned to Nashville, gentle and golden, shedding the damp chill of the days when Sophie and Weston first crossed paths. The sky stretched wide and clear, sunlight spilling over wild cherry blossoms that bloomed in clusters along the street, where Sunlight Bakery had quietly transformed. No longer just a modest shop tucked in the shade, the bakery had expanded, opening up to a backyard garden that burst with color. Rows of daisies, lavender and hydrangeas swayed in the breeze, radiant under the forgiving sun. At the garden gate, a wooden sign hung beneath soft rays, its chalk lettering refreshed each morning. "Sometimes saving a life saves your own." Laughter echoed through the space, children chasing one another across the grass, their joy blending seamlessly with the playful barks of small dogs. Among them was Cooper, proudly carrying himself with the charm of an old friend. His golden coat glowed, and a mint-green bandana embroidered with Sunlight Buddy crowned him, the honorary co-founder of this new haven. Beneath the shade of a flowering chinaberry tree stood a simple wooden bench. Weston, Sophie, and Cooper shared the space, quietly woven together in the easy intimacy of the afternoon. Weston wore a pale linen shirt, his hand resting on an open book. Sophie leaned gently against his shoulder, fingers curled around a worn, familiar volume. Her favorite childhood story, its spine faded and soft from years of turning pages. She flipped to the first page, where a photograph had been pressed. Beneath the plastic sleeve, there she was, arms wrapped tightly around Cooper on that unforgettable day. Traffic blurred in the background, chaos suspended while she clung only to one simple, urgent truth, that this small life needed saving no matter the cost. Weston glanced up from his book. His eyes no longer carried the shadows they once had. What remained was light, soft, steady, as if grief had finally grown roots beneath him, steady enough to let new blooms rise. Sophie caught his gaze and smiled. "Funny," she said, her voice light. "I never imagined I'd end up here, sitting in the sun, reading next to the man who once sent me spiraling over a magazine article." Weston tilted his head, laughing softly. "And I never imagined I'd survive myself long enough to see this day." Their fingers laced naturally, without fanfare, It wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be. But in its simplicity, it marked everything that had quietly, irrevocably changed. Sunlight poured through the leaves overhead, dappling the earth with shimmering freckles. Flags strung across the garden swayed gently, carrying with them hints of cinnamon, butter, and the quiet conviction of those who still chose to believe. Sophie had once only wished to be seen. Weston had once been sure there was nothing left worth beginning. And yet, it took only one small act of courage, cradling a trembling puppy in the middle of a rushing street, to save them both. And if you happen to pass by Sunlight Bakery someday, you might see that same handwritten message chalked onto the sign, simple but steady as the heartbeat of the place itself. Sometimes saving a life saves your own. If you've stayed with She Saved a Puppy until this very last moment, thank you truly from the bottom of my heart. This story wasn't only about rescuing a small dog. It was about healing, about trusting again, and about the quiet courage it takes to open our hearts. Something many of us are silently learning how to do in our own lives. If you saw even a part of yourself in Sophie, in Weston or in Cooper, don't hesitate to share that feeling with someone who might need to hear it. Be sure to hit subscribe to join us for more heartfelt, healing, and inspiring stories to come. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a journey that just might stay with you.